If you were wondering when DeSantis would be back sucking up to Trump, a la Ted Cruz with his most perfect phone call to the donors, the infamous image of Ted Cruz meekly, submissively doing phone calls for Donald Trump in 2016 after Trump called his wife ugly and said his dad was involved in the JFK assassination. You know, he decided, hey, I've gotta be subservient here, and Republicans do that quite well. This is DeSantis's time to embarrass himself even more than he had previously. DeSantis, really was trying to act tough when he dropped out. But unfortunately for him, his heels are finally touching the ground. And he had an appearance here with Eric Bolling on Newsmax, speaking about how Nikki Haley, after dropping out of the presidential race, declined to endorse Donald Trump, or at the very least did not overtly endorse him in her speech where she announced that she was suspending her campaign. And Ron has a real problem with that. Why aren't you getting behind our nominee? This is him speaking to Bolling about that.
Before we get into some of the other things, I would just love to hear your first reaction to Super Tuesday. Trump basically swept the field with the exception of Vermont, and then Nikki Haley bowing out this morning. Your thoughts?
Well, it was, I think, to be expected. I mean, she had waged a campaign on the idea that you can somehow win the Republican nomination for president by getting the votes of mostly just non-Republicans. And that just doesn't work. And we saw that play out in Iowa. And I said at the time that she didn't have a pathway. So I'm glad we're all through that process. And, now we're in a situation where Republicans are staring down the barrel of a President Biden who's clearly not up to the job. And, as a candidate in 2020, I made that same argument. But if you compare him to 2020 to now, I mean, the guy is clearly slowed down dramatically. His policies have not worked. So now's the time for that to be the focus.
Very quickly, Nikki Haley made the debate stages with you over at Fox and others. I think there's a couple other people had debates. On the premise that the RNC required everyone to say that they would eventually, if you're going to make that debate stage, you would eventually support the eventual nominee. She rose her hand, said she would, and now has kind of backtracked so far, didn't support him, said she might not support him. What is your recommend? I mean, it's probably not your job to give her political recommendations, but what's your advice to Haley? Especially, listen, the two of you right now, for me, are the odds-on favorites for the GOP in 2028, and I'd say you're on track.
Well, first, just on the debates, I was saying that Newsmax should have had a debate, so I was game for that. RNC didn't do that. But yeah, I signed the pledge, and you signed the pledge saying that you're going to not take your ball and go home. And so I honored the pledge, and she's going to have to make a decision about whether she wants to or not. But the idea that somehow circumstances have changed, I think we all knew what we were doing when we did that, and you got to make a judgment about whether that's meaningful to you. And so for me, I tell people, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
All right, so we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Ron. Put yourself in Nikki's shoes, and that would be easy for you because she often wears high heels like you do as well. It's difficult for her. She just went through a grueling campaign of taking a lot of donor money to stay in the race for a long period of time on a prayer that Donald Trump, would get some sort of heart attack from his McDonald's diet, or if he gets locked up or decides to drop out or runs out of money, or the donor money, is, I think, there's an alternate purpose to it too, is like they were trying to weaken Donald Trump. I think there are a lot of big money donors that would much prefer a more stable, centrist kind of guy like Joe Biden. Although I would say that the antitrust stuff might be throwing a wrench in that. But that they might prefer Joe Biden to Donald Trump in that way. It was the same reason that the Kochs sat out when Trump was the nominee in 2016. he's unstable and not really controllable. And I think that when you're a billionaire or a big money donor trying to corrupt our process, that is the most valuable asset for you. So it really did not take Ron a long time after talking tough to Donald to come around and do his dirty work of going after Nikki Haley.
Why don't you come and debate me?
Yeah.
Why don't we debate the ideas instead of personal attacks?
Yes, because Nikki,
They're Lucchese boots off the rack.
Nikki went back on her promise. Look, I don't know if Nikki Haley's going to endorse Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think she will, honestly, because her entire political future is reliant on the notion that the Trump wing of the party will be removed, will be, I guess, determined to be such losers and too extreme and too untethered from reality that eventually the Republicans will have to return to the Mitt Romney style Republicans who, again, it's amazing that 4 years after Romney was the nominee, Donald Trump was the nominee. But I don't think that process is going to take one election cycle. It's going to take 2, 3, 4. It's going to take a while. And the idea that Ron DeSantis has a future in the Republican Party in 2028 is hilarious to me. But Nikki Haley may, right? She's doing her test run at this moment. But not, I don't think she could ever be, I really don't think she could ever be the nominee. We just played 2 clips yesterday of voters in North Carolina saying that they could never vote for Nikki Haley because she's a woman. They could never do it because she might be menopausal and irrational as president.
There's either a real delusion that she's under that she thinks that there's actually any sort of appetite for a post-Trump reckoning. The Nazis at CPAC would like a word,
Yes.
Nikki Haley.
Literal Nazis at CPAC.
The ones glad-handing with garden variety Republican Party operatives who, in some cases, both in the media and in actual Republican circles, were Nazi affiliated.
Yes.
Nate Hochman, the guy who was making those covert ads for the DeSantis campaign. Blake Neff, who was fired from Tucker Carlson's operation on Fox and is now just a producer for Charlie Kirk and Jack Posobiec's podcast. These people aren't 90 years old. They're going to be forming the next phase of whatever the Republican Party wants to be.
Yeah.
Even after Trump. Steve Bannon literally said in that Circus documentary, or that Showtime documentary a few months back, Donald Trump is a moderate force in this. We're going past Trump.
Oh.
Trump is not the point of the movement. He is a vehicle for what we want to establish. The idea that
an Orban-style kind of politics here in the United States.
Idea that Nikki Haley either thinks that there's an appetite for this or assumes that once Trump is removed from the picture, the entire idea of like Trumpism will go away is so naive to be cynical.
She has to believe it, though. She has to. Or what is her career?
She can't perform another way that she doesn't. She can't even act as if she doesn't believe it, because what's the pitch then after that? If you're not a true believer that you can be the vessel by which the Republican Party moves on from Donald Trump, you're nothing.
And I mean, look, I don't feel any sympathy for her because she's a Republican. So if she wants to gain power as someone who's attached to some semblance of reality, I've got news for her. She's in the wrong party. But like, that's the that's the thing, is like, you have decided that you are a Republican, and that is the number one problem with trying to think that you're going to be able to appeal to people with reason or with respectability. It's just not in the DNA of the base. They don't want it.
And speaking of the Democratic Party, as the like, her being potentially in the wrong one, she's also maybe in the wrong one in terms of, actually, they could probably make this work in the Republican Party as well, because I always like to refer to, and some of my friends and I joke about this, that the Democratic Party is basically not a political project or a policy project. It's just kind of a patronage mill for failed candidates and failed. So like, if you look in the ambassadorships for the Biden administration, you will see littered of former senators and former failed congressional national campaigns. Just see where Joe Kennedy, who lost to Ed Markey, is working. See where Joe Donnelly, who lost in Indiana, is working. They're working for Biden. Maybe Nikki Haley will find some sort of operation where she'll still get that Reid Hoffman type of donor money to just sort of be like,
Biden
just get along and stop with the yelling.
Yeah, no, I think she's actually too ideological for that. But that didn't stop Biden from ignoring the uncommitted voters, and then immediately after she suspended her campaign,
making the entreaty to the Haley voters,
making a entreaty. Yeah, and last thing I'll say on this before we wrap is just like, what is the incentive for her, honestly, to kiss the ring and endorse Donald Trump? Because we've seen what happens to those who do. They just get swallowed up whole and then chewed out and eventually probably stabbed in the back. We remember Jeff Sessions, and we remember like what is Ted Cruz's broader aspirations now after kissing the ring?
No,
podcasting.
They're neutered. Yeah, same thing for Marco Rubio.
Neutered. Ron DeSantis is going that way as well.
100%.
He's got there's no one who sucked up to Donald Trump more than Ron DeSantis, and that was his bet going into this election, and he is done. So it's gonna be a long process, but many of the more standard Republicans like Mitch McConnell were right. He is destroying the party. The problem is that the Democrats refuse to capitalize on it.
Absolutely. And you start as you said with for example with DeSantis, similarly with Ted Cruz. With Ted Cruz, it was starting by saying Trump's a psychopath and I'm the only one who can defeat him. You win one caucus in Iowa and then lose and start phone banking immediately, basically. And now you are kind of just a faceless soldier in this war until you get your own, until you go into full-time content production, as Ted Cruz wants to very clearly. He mentions his podcast every 5 seconds he's on TV. But DeSantis also had to kind of fast forward as well, reading Trump's The Art of the Deal to his kids in campaign ads earlier, winning the governorship under Trump's endorsement, and then now finally just coming back to where Daddy likes him.
Yep,
right under his boot.
God, I love that you said boot. Right under his heel?
Right under his heel.
There we go.
It's Lucchese and it's off the rack. Okay?
Yeah, okay.